Hello and welcome to Addiction Talk. It is our first episode of 2023, and we have a special guest, as always, here to share his journey. Many of us know him, Tom Arnold, but I want to give you a brief look at his history before we bring him on up to share more of his sobriety journey. Take a look. Actor and comedian Tom Arnold has had a well-publicized journey with addiction. In the late 80s, he arrived in LA with his substance use under wraps to pursue a career in comedy, and soon after was brought on as a writer for the sitcom Roseanne. After marrying the show's star and gaining significant popularity and success, he decided he needed treatment. Throughout the 90s, Arnold maintained his sobriety. His career flourished, and he even served as a sponsor to late comedian Chris Farley. Over the years, he's publicly embraced sobriety and experienced several relapses. Today, he has more than 5 years of sobriety. Addiction Talk starts now. Well, let's bring Tom up. We've been talking backstage or in our virtual green room, and he's a dad, so he's trying to get everything together tonight. I know that's been a big deal for you. How's everything going here in California?
It's going well. I got their stack, made of their bagels, and they tell me they're going to be fine for a little bit. My kids are 9 and 7. I'm a single dad. I'm 63 and a half. And so, but we have a good time. It's the biggest reward for my sobriety. It's the real miracle. And so, I try to stay on point with them.
No, I can tell you've just done a good job. And I want to just dig into your story. I know a lot of people, we've seen you on the big screen, we've seen you on TV, but we may not know all of your journey and how you got to where you are today. So I know that you've actually had a lifelong battle with addiction. When did you first realize that you had an addiction or that you were struggling?
Well, I grew up in a small town in Iowa, it's Hobo, Iowa, and everybody drank, it seemed like, and everybody, I got into a lot of trouble when I was young, and starting at 15, started getting arrested for, getting drunk and fighting with the police, which is a terrible idea. And then when I got my license at 16, then I started getting arrested for drunk driving, which is a worse idea. I do remember, my dad did say at one point when he was bailing me out of jail naked. My friends and I had streaked to the old folks' home. And I said, because it was a night and we're like, we got to do something that feels like we're in college. I worked on the kill floor of a meat packing plant after high school. And I said, let's go streaky. That's popular. It was popular in California in the late 70s. It just got into Iowa in the 80s. And we went to the downtown to the diner, and me and my two buddies ran in there naked, but there was nobody there. So it doesn't count as streaky. So I said, I know where there'll be people at Jefferson Square Manor. I know, and not for the old folks. We're not weirdos. But I said, the nurses will love it. They'll think it's hilarious. And we went up there, and it turns out they didn't love us. And that's something about being an alcoholic. A lot of times you're like, oh, people will love this. And it turns out people don't. Anyway, they'd called the police and got taken to jail naked. And my poor dad, who was a saint, had to come down and bail me out again. And I remember him saying, Tommy, do you think you might be an alcoholic? Because that's what the judge said last time. And I was like, I don't think that so. And, nobody had used the term alcoholic. I remember Betty Ford was the first time I'd heard a person talk about alcoholism and admit that they were an alcoholic. And I just thought, well, I'll get on the other side of this. But, I had a lot of close calls, and it's something, the one deal I made was I'm never going to do drugs. In my town, it was people that drank all the time, and then the stoners. It was the rednecks and the stoners. And you did not, I'm like, I am never doing drugs. And that lasted till just after I got out of high school. But And the thing about addiction is you find something that you feel like, oh, this is my thing. And that's how it was with alcohol for a long time. This is my thing. And then I found something else. You talk about a relapse. I wasn't working a great program. The one thing I have done, the reason I'm still alive, is because I've always gone to 12-step meetings. I've gone when I was in relapse, and I've just gone, and I've done it for 35 years, and it's the thing that's saved my life. I haven't had a drink since December 10th, 1989, but at 19 years sober, I wrecked my motorcycle on PCH out there, Pacific Coast Highway, and broke my back. And I remember up at that point, I was sponsoring some guys that were opioids and heroin addicts, and I would always say to them, "Oh no, that's not my thing. My thing is alcohol and cocaine. I would never like that." And I got a little cocky, and the ambulance came, and the guy's like, "Are you in pain?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, not anymore," and gave me a shot of fentanyl. And I remember thinking, "Oh, this is what I needed. This is the thing I needed."
Well, Tom, you've given me so much. I wanted to go back and unpack some of that. You almost gave me the whole
I'll stop talking. I'll stop talking. You get in there. I won't say anything.
I said, Tom, you can tell he is a comedian and actor. He can give me the whole story. Yeah. But I want to go back because I thought you said a lot of interesting things. Like you're 15, 16. You start drinking kind of more as fun. You notice you're getting into trouble. You get arrested, and then you're like, oh, I'm only going to drink. And it escalated, where you started trying cocaine. You said shortly after that, you're in high school trying cocaine. But what do you feel was the wake-up call? Because I think a lot of people, when they're struggling, they're in denial, or they can be, like you said, oh, everybody kind of drinks in my town, or it's normal. I don't really think I have a problem. So what was that wake-up call for you that you had the head knowledge to say, okay, something is wrong here? I have a problem.
Well, first of all, I started drinking when I was 12, and my friends all drank at the same age. It's crazy.
It's 12. Wow.
Yeah. Oh no, it's madness. And but you didn't realize at the time. My dad, who raised me and my sister and brother by himself, was a very good guy and non-alcoholic. My mother, on the other hand, was a maniac and a terrible alcoholic, and married 7 times in our little town. And she would come over just wasted, whether it be like at Christmas or whatever. She'd show up, and my dad did something that I would not do with my kids. If something happens with my kid's mom and it's just incredibly inappropriate in front of them, or I'll take a moment and go, hey, what just happened was not okay. I don't treat people like that. I don't let you treat people like that. And it just wasn't okay. So I take a moment, because otherwise you get sort of a weird sense of reality. Now, myself, I knew that my mother was not a mother. Like I never had the illusion she moved out, I think, when I was 4. I just knew she would say, I'm not maternal. I'm not into this. But my sister, who's a year and a half younger, worshipped her. And so she would come over and do these really inappropriate things. And my dad would just laugh. He found her amusing, but I think he thought, I'm going to take the high road. So I'm not going to say anything for other kids. And it really affected my sister later in life, who went on to be the queen of meth, the documentary series about her, because she's like, oh, that woman's my idol. So, she did good in our house. And then when she was 14, she moved. I'd already moved in with my mom, because I'm like, I want to drink. I'm 15. I want to grow my hair. I want to do whatever I want. I don't want rules. But I knew what I was getting into. My sister, on the other hand, decided to join me over there. And immediately she was my mom's best friend. And, my mom made her get married at 14 and just did all kinds of, was very inappropriate. I mean, they were drinking buddies. I knew better, but it didn't stop me from drinking a lot. And like I say, I didn't even smoke pot until I was out of high school, because I thought, well, I'm just going to focus on this thing here. And that's going to be my thing. And there's certainly a lot of people that get drunk all the time in this town. But, you start getting arrested, you see your future. There was always a voice in my head in the back of a squad car where I'd be like, oh, I think this was the one time too many. I've ruined everything. But yeah, there was a voice that said, if you just get your stuff together right now, you're going to have a chance at a decent life. And so
how do you think you were able to still, in spite of, dealing with the addiction or realizing that you were drinking a lot, why do you think you were still able to make it to Hollywood, that it didn't impact you early on, that you were still able to make that leap?
Well, it did. I'm very lucky. First of all, nobody in my hometown goes to Hollywood. And there was a point after high school, I was working on the kill floor of the meatpacking plant, the Hormel there in town, to save money to go to college. Because I said, if I get in college, I'm going to have a chance. Just to get from Ottumwa, Iowa to Iowa City, Iowa, where there were different people looked different, people were from all over. And they had a stage, an open mic stage at the student union where you could tell jokes or read a poem or whatever. And I said, I just have to get to that place. In the third year of the meatpacking plant, I was looking around, and the people, there was lifers there. And my grandpa had worked there for almost 50 years. And I was trying to figure out how they did that. And in my third year, I'm like, I need to quit having these dreams, because it's just not going to happen. You can't get from Ottumwa, Iowa to Hollywood. There's just no way possible. And I went out drinking that night to the disco, the jailhouse, at our little disco there, which my parents ruined because they started line dancing there. And I'm like, oh my God, this has ruined everything. But it was cool for a minute. And I walked outside at bar time, and I saw on the street a guy named Andy Kaufman, great comedian. He was on a show called Taxi. And I'm like, how did you get here? And he'd come in town because there was a big women's wrestling event at our Coliseum. And he was wrestling women. That was his new thing. And he came in, and after the show, he paid them to stay longer and wrestle him. And it makes sense if you know who Andy Kaufman is. And then he took everybody to Happy Joe's Pizza on a bus. And I thought, that's what I want to do with my life. But I thought, if he could get here, he was studying transcendental meditation over at Fairfield, which is 20 miles up the road, Maharishi International University. But I thought, well, then it's possible that I could get there.
And you did it. I mean, here's the thing. Yeah. So by the time you got there, how bad was your habit by the time you got to Hollywood, and by the time you made it and you started working on shows like Roseanne, and, people were starting to recognize you?
Yeah. Well, I have to say one thing about dreams. When I would be chiseling heads or whatever my job was at the meatpacking plant, I would dream that I was best friends with Robin Williams, who was on Mork and Mindy at the time. And that's one of those dreams at night. I'm like, I got to quit having that dream because it's so disappointing. And, cut to like 10 years later, I'm in Robin Williams' house up in San Francisco. Yeah. And Rob Williams was one of us. And he everything good you've ever heard about him is true and more. If I called him at 3 a.m. and said, so-and-so's in trouble, he'd be like, let's go get him, whether he knew him or not. But I'm sitting at Rob Williams' house. We're about to start this movie, 9 months. And at the end of the dinner, it's just Robin and I say, hey, I've been here before. And he's like, in my house? I go, no, me, you, best friends. And he's like, we're not best friends. I go, I know, but this is as close.
But you're like, this is my dream. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is as close as going to get. But what happened is I progressed fast into drugs. I went after high school. I moved up to, when I got done at the meatpack plant, I moved up to Minneapolis to try stand-up comedy. And somebody, like the first night up there, said, hey, try this. And go in the bathroom and try it, gave me a bindle of cocaine. And I came back out. They're like, okay, where's the rest? I go, oh, no, I did it all. And they're like, oh, we have to go buy more then. I go, oh, that sounds reasonable. And I just escalated with cocaine for 5 years, from 83 to 88. And in 80, Roseanne would come. I met her at the comedy club there, my first ex-wife. And we would both party hard when she was there, or when we were on the road doing stuff. And so in 88, I moved out to, they were starting the Roseanne show, and I moved out to write the show because I'd done a lot of writing.
You were still using during this time? This was the time.
Oh, yeah. And right when I got in there. I was in my office. First of all, I thought, I'm making a lot of money now. I can buy in quantity. That seems smarter, because I met a drug dealer the first day I was there. But she came into my office and said, wait a minute, do you do this all the time? I thought you only did it when we were together every couple of months. I go, no, I do it all the time. Yeah, every day be fine. And she goes, that's bad. And I said, is it? She goes, yeah, that's bad. You can't do that. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to have to hide this from her. I didn't think, I'm going to have to get my stuff together. I thought I'm going to hide it from her. And you're never really able to hide it from people. The next year when we were a couple, she really wanted me to move into her house with her and the kids. And I was like, I did not want to do it. I had a car that wouldn't even make it up the hill. I liked my apartment in Van Nuys. They lived in Beverly Hills. And I think a lot of it was like, I could do my thing over in this apartment. But I moved in, and we were getting married. It was in all the news. I remember one night I was driving up Benedict Canyon, and I was so messed up that I couldn't remember the code to get in our gate, and which was my birthday, which is crazy. And I had to drive all the way up to Mulholland to get a signal to call her. And she answered, and she'll come down. So I had to drive back down. And I remember thinking, she's going to pull up her car, get out, punch me, choke me, whatever, and I deserve it. And so her car comes down the long gate. I see it. She gets out of the car, walks up to me, and hugs me and said, I just want you to come home. And it was a really big moment for me, because that was God right there. And it really was life-changing. I did. By the way, I did do the rest of my coke that night. I went stuck in the tennis court. But I got into a cab then and went to rehab, because also I had teenage.
What was it about that moment? I want to go back there, Tom, for a second. So what was it about that moment with Roseanne and her just hugging you and just saying, I'm glad you're home, and you having that feeling that lets you say, okay, now I want to get help for this?
Well, I mean, it cut through all the, I was messed up, and it cut through everything. And they call it a moment of clarity. And, I could feel that. And again, so I knew things are going to be different for now. Now, after she went to sleep, I snuck down to the tennis court and did the rest of my drugs. But the next day I got up and got a cab and went to a place called New Beginnings in Century City. And it was a life-changing. And I'll tell you what really changed once I got there. And I'd been to a couple other places for a limited time, Van Nuys Psych and a couple places. But when I got there, my job was to go down to the drugstore and get the newspapers. Everybody has a little job. And I remember looking at them, and it said, that I'm on coke and we're not getting married, and the wedding had been canceled. And I wasn't aware of that. And it was on TV and everything. And about 8 days, but I accept that. I get that. But about 8 days in, I realized something, because it never occurred to me to stay in a place like this for myself, to get sober for myself. I always wanted to do it to prove something to this guy, or stay out of jail, or this and that. And I realized, I need to do this. I deserve this myself.
So that was day 8. You realized that this was something that you had to do for yourself. Was that the beginning? Because I know you had a stretch of 20 years of sobriety.
Yeah.
Was that the beginning of that 20-year stretch?
Yeah. Well, it's on the 8th day after I had that revelation, which is important because you have to have that a lot. I called Roseanne, and we hadn't talked. And I said, I got to tell you something. I love you. Thank you. I would not be here without you. And I understand why we're not getting married. I understand why I'm not working on the show. And but I'm going to stay here and do this for myself. And she said immediately, we're getting married. And I remember thinking, if I knew I could have manipulated her without having the real feeling of staying and doing this myself, I would have just said those words. But, and I want to say this, it's hard, especially at first, everybody's like, you got to love yourself. You got to like yourself before you love yourself. And it's hard to look in the mirror and see this guy and hate this guy. But what I did is I took a picture of myself when I was 4, and I carried that in my wallet, and I'd look at it, because I love that kid. And that kid didn't have a lot of people looking out for him. And he doesn't deserve to die like this. He deserves to have a good life. And so I used that as a crutch for a long time, and I do think about that now. So yeah, and then I was clean and sober for 19 years when I wrecked my motorcycle, and I
And
got
you got
that
that
first.
pain medicine. At that
Yeah,
point, did you think? I think a lot of people, once they've been in recovery for a while, think maybe I've made it over the hurdle. I don't know if that's true, but I know that you've said
yeah.
before that you got complacent.
Well, I got cocky to think, oh, what I loved was alcohol and cocaine. I don't think ever taken a pain pill. I certainly heroin seemed like, well, no, I don't. And I got cocky, and I got that shot. And I'm like, oh hell yeah, this is. And so the next year was my 20th, and I remember going and getting a cake, and I realized I am still on the pain medicine a year later. I'm not sober. I mean, I took the cake and I ate it, but then the next day I called my sponsor and I started back at day one. And I have to say this, man, when you're in a meeting, you hear a lot of stories from old timers. My sponsor's been sober for over 40 years, and that's powerful. That's, he got arrested once when he was 18, and then he got sober like a normal person would. But when I'm in a meeting and a guy steps up that had time or whatever reason, it says, I have 3 days. That affects me. That is so powerful to me because that's honest. That's, and I know that feeling, and it takes a lot of guts. You got to do it because we get tied up with our length of sobriety. Like it's our, it's what we're known for. We're that guy with this. Right. And the whole point is that we're honest, rigorously so, and you have to start over and starting over.
Difficult to start over. I mean, knowing that you were 19 years, 20 years, and to have to go back to day one, was that challenging? And how did you get your mindset around it?
Well, I mean, I had to. What ended up happening was I ended up in a coma for a month. Something burst inside of me. And I remember I woke up at the hospital, and I'd lost 40 pounds. That's the one good thing. But it did huge damage to my body. I had an open, it had to be an open wound for a year, which every day someone would have to come over and debride it. It's called cut the dead skin off. And they couldn't seal it back up until it healed on the outside. So, and I had a colostomy for 90 days. Like that's that should do it. And the first thing I did when I got out of the hospital was go back to Betty Ford. And I'm in there in the medical unit with all this stuff, and it's a weird feeling. And it got very dark for me, very depressed. I'm not generally depressed, but it was a life and death thing. And I remember my sponsor, I talked to him back in LA, and he said, here's the thing. You start over your sobriety, but all the good things you did in sobriety before, all the people you helped, all of your service, that still counts, because I was convinced that none of it counted because I screwed up. And that, that's something I tell people too, besides that relapse is a part of our recovery. You don't want to do it one too many times, but you also don't want to be around people who shame you. Because you're going to shame yourself. That's how we are. That's how we roll. And you need people that support you. And everybody has a different journey. You know what I mean? They do things differently, but whatever it takes, and just keep coming back, like they say.
No, I think that's powerful. And, speaking of rebounding, you have rebounded amazingly, because not only, have you relapsed once, I know you've had some other relapses, you've gone through a lot in your life. So what keeps you going? What inspires you? How do you wake up every day and, think positive and take it forward in your life and all the challenges?
Well, I love being around other addict alcoholics. I try to do that as often as possible. I want to say that 6 years ago, my other relapse, again, I was having some issues with, my son. And when I was young, I've talked about it. There was a pedophile that my mom left me with. And then later in sobriety, I went back and found the guy and tracked him down and worked with my therapist so I didn't kill him. He was a huge businessman and a religious leader back in Iowa. And I confronted him at his place of work. I practiced, and then 30 other boys came forward, because people were. So I thought, that's done. I put that to bed. I'm not going to have to think about this anymore. But the moment my son was born, I remember thinking, okay, he's perfect. I was perfect. And then as he got to the age that I was, it started at 4, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Who was looking out for me? You got to be kidding me. And it started bugging me, and I became my own doctor and got benzos, Xanax, Ativan, to sleep. And which, if your doctor prescribes it, whatever. But I eventually I'm taking 8 of those at night, and that became. And by the way, benzos, people don't realize how insidious those are and how much it. I would try to get off of those, but it was, and I've gotten off of all those other drugs in a couple of days or whatever. But this benzo stuff, it messes with your mind. And so I went back to, I went to Crossroads there in Antigua, just to work on everything, but to deal with that. And it is a tough withdrawal. But when I was there, one of my guys from my men's group committed suicide. A famous musician hung himself. And when I was talking to his wife afterwards, she said, well, he was trying to stay up, he wasn't drinking. He was trying to stay, he was taking benzos, and then we had an argument and he hung up. And then, but I know what happened. I feel he had a strap where he worked out. He's a musician. He was on the road, and at night he worked out with this thing, and it was on his bathroom door. And what happens with benzos, you kind of get a film going on in your head, separate that a couple things. And in the back of his mind, the part of the mind that wants to kill us, which is always there, I saw that thing every night when I could hang myself with that. It just started playing. And then all of a sudden he snapped and may not even thought he was in reality, but that's what he did. So, it just was a God shot and a reminder of why I needed to stay there and work on this new thing. And, so, I just,
that is so deep because, a lot of times, like you said, looking at the experience of seeing your son, that childhood trauma, we know for a lot of people, for the patients that we treat at American Addiction Centers, a lot of people have dealt with some type of childhood trauma. And that trauma, the drinking or the drugs or whatever is often a coping mechanism. And it is interesting to me that you had this trigger with your own son and it took you back down there. So how do you navigate adversity now? Because I can only imagine life isn't always easy. I mean, I know you're doing well. I've heard you recently lost 80 pounds. So you're probably in the best shape of your life. And, you're a dad there. But when challenges hit you, when things happen now, what's different? How do you navigate that?
Well, I try to wake up and live in gratitude. Sometimes I wake up, I'm not feeling, 100%. And I just start going through my list, my gratitude list. And number one, my kids are here. In spite of other people's best efforts, the kids are here. There is a lot going on. And a year ago this week, I was giving the kids a bath in there, and it's hard to get them in the bathtub sometimes, but it's harder to get them out. So I do a thing where I turn around, I have their towels, and I count to 10 at the door. And then I turn around, whoever gets out first wins. And that time, I noticed that my right eye, like a curtain came down. And I couldn't see out of it. And I thought, well, maybe I hit myself in the eye, whatever. And before the night was over, half of my vision came back, the upper half. And I was supposed to fly to Alaska to film a pilot the next morning. And the old Tom would have just done that. Like, I'll figure this thing out. I'll figure it out when I get to Alaska or whatever. But I thought, I'm going to whip by my eye doctor on the way to the airport. And I go in there and they shoot some dye in me. They're trying to figure out what is going on. And he comes back and says, you had a stroke. And, those are one of the things you just don't want to hear that. There's a lot of things you don't want to hear. And that's one of them. And he said, you have to go over to UCLA to the stroke protocol for 24 hours. Now, you get into the hospital. I mean, you're thinking there's a lot because you are powerless in a lot of ways with a lot of things. And if you live long enough, things like that are going to happen.
Right.
I've had friends that have been sober 40 years come in one day. They're like, I have pancreatic cancer. And then in 2 months, they're gone. It's so appreciate your days. I get over there and they're laying in the ER and they have a list of strokes, 1 through 10. And 10 is dead. I mean, mine was a 1. And there's a special name for it. I can't remember it. But, I got out of there in 24 hours and I weighed 285 pounds. I thought, well, that could be part of the situation here. So I started exercising with a guy that's a transformational trainer and lost 80 pounds. And I had to take a leap of faith because the guy talked a good game. I met him at Arnold Schwarzenegger's. He's like 4 years before. He's like, I really want to work with you. And I just avoided it until then. But he said, by this summer, you're going to look like you did when you did the original True Lies movie. And I was like, I cannot, that just seems impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I took a leap of faith, did the same thing every day. He told me, here's what you're going to do. You're going to eat this at this time, this at this time, and this is the cardio you're going to do. And it turned out to be a great thing. And I have to say this too, sugar is the devil. The reason I drank is because it turns to sugar. Like I could easily go back to sugar and eat a cake. So, and when you have kids, there's stuff around.
Yeah, so
but it all goes, how do I stay sober? How do I feel good about myself? This exercise thing is particularly the cardio. It does something to my head where I can't fight all the battles. I'm a little too, it works my brain out and I can't quite go there with everything. And it just makes my life, and I try to stay in the moment. Like right now, what is going on right now? I have a lot of fear about the future and financial things and other things, but right now, and if there is something I'm concerned about, if I have an issue, I need to take care of it. I need to deal with it. Sometimes it's embarrassing. Sometimes there's stuff that you fear, but if you put it off and don't deal with it, don't at least try to figure it out, then it's going to eat at you, at least me. And that's what would kill me. So one day at a time,
I love that because you're talking about living in that moment. I think that's very powerful. And, the gratitude that you talked about. And I also see we have a question. So I want to make sure I got to this question before I asked you a few more. It's, we have Stefan said, why do you think going to day 1 is helpful, Tom? And I guess maybe he thinks restarting, I guess, when you've relapsed.
Well, if you can avoid it, you don't want to restart. But I think realizing you need to be at day 1, acknowledging it to your brothers and sisters and, people you trust in the program, that's a really powerful thing. I think people do things they want. I'm speaking as a sneaky alcoholic addict. We want to hide it, or we think this will make us look a certain way. And it kills a lot of people because they have relapsed, but with that guilt
the
and
stigma,
that's
the shame of people thinking, oh, you've relapsed again.
And
but
people,
that one,
that's right. That's right. But to me, there's nothing more powerful than someone that does that. And I'm not speaking about myself, but I'm speaking about when I'm in a meeting and somebody's like, I'm at day 1. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what I needed to hear. I love the other stories. I love the success stories, but I needed to hear that. And you see people like flowers, because this program does work and rehab does work. And it seems it may not be the first time. It may take 2 times. Who knows what it takes? But at some point, if you just follow the instructions, that's all you have to do. Just don't drink, use drugs, do these things every day. And it'll work out. And all of a sudden you'll be 5, I'm 5, a little over 5.5 years. We celebrate half years here because I'm an old dad. My kids have birthdays and I just had
5.5 years. And that's tremendous. When I think about that, one of the things that you have done through your sobriety is give back. I know at one point you were a sponsor for comedian Chris Farley. What was that like to be able to support someone else in their journey? I know he ultimately succumbed to addiction, but I know you probably played a critical role in helping him maybe during some of those challenging times. So what has it meant to you to give back? And have you reached out or helped other celebrities since then?
Well, you always reach out to other people. You see something going on, you reach out to them and say, hey, can I be of service? Here's my home group. We'd love to have you with, private, confidential. Chris Farley, though, I met him because he played me on Saturday Night Live. He did an impression. And so Lauren Michael said, you guys have to come out and we're going to host a show. And you'll love, and he said to me privately, you need to talk to Chris. You have a lot in common. And I know what that means. And so I'd been sober 3 years, and I got Chris to come out to LA, and he did my TV show. He played my brother in all my shows. And then I said, hey, come up to my office for a second. I got to just come up and talk to me. He went up there, and I had a great group of people, the circle, and you walk in like, oh, shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were very helpful, and we took him. I did a thing with him. First of all, I told him early on, you can either do these drugs or, but you can't weigh 350 pounds and do drugs. I'm just saying, if you want to die faster, that's the best way. But I had a regular professional interventionist. I had all the guys, and he's like, oh, I just need to run back to New York real quick. And, and I'm like, no, that's a terrible idea. And then the guy did something brilliant from the hospital. He said, we give you medication at the hospital because I think everybody worries about jonesing or detoxing, like they can't survive that. And you do have a couple of dark days, but believe me, you can survive it. And he said, we'll get you down to the hospital. I'll give you something and you'll be kind of effed up. And Chris stood up and went, let's roll. Because
I
they
can
give
see
you
him
different
doing
things.
that too, in his voice. Yeah. I can hear it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was his first of 17 rehabs. And, he tried, it's the thing about being sober is you have to be a bit of an a-hole, because at some point you have to do it for you. And you're like, not for these guys, not for, this has to be, you have to be selfish. And you have to say, I'm going to do this for me. And, I think there's some people that everybody could get sober, but there's some people that are soft-hearted, that it's harder. They're more.
Why do you think it's harder?
Well, I think if you're hypersensitive, but that's just part of the disease trying to kill you. You feel a lot of things, and you just have to be a little tougher at some point. You have to say, okay, I'm doing this thing. I'm going to suck it up. I'm going to do this thing and take a leap of faith. And I can remember from my last, when I started this 5.5 years, just one day at a time, coming off those bentos, like it's grueling. You're like, how does this get back to, well, first of all, how did I get back here again? It's embarrassing, it's whatever, but it does go by fairly quick if you do the right thing. And all of a sudden one day you're like, holy hell, I haven't thought about it much, but I feel kind of amazing. And my brain is working kind of, and so there's all those things. And when you first go to a meeting on day one and people are like, well, at 5 years, you'll feel better. You just got to get to 30 days, and then you got to get to 90 days. And those are by far the hardest.
One day at a time approach.
That first cake.
That first day. Curious, have you had the same sponsor during this whole time?
Yeah, I did.
Wow.
Yeah, he's like one of the best people in the world. I think he sponsors like 30 guys. Like, he's an incredible human being. He has a life too.
Really highly recommend having a sponsor or having, in addition to meetings, but having an anchor.
Yes,
to
absolutely. Absolutely. You got to have a sponsor. And if it doesn't work out with you and your sponsor, personality things, that happens sometimes. I think early on I had a couple things like that. You could fire your sponsor, because you have to remember something. You're grateful to your sponsor, but you're doing him a favor, because he gets to be of service to you. And the best sponsors will say, do this, call me. Staying in touch is the key. And I can always tell when people are having issues because they don't call me back. They don't check in. They don't. And I think that's a super important thing to do. You always feel better when you do it. But I highly recommend having a sponsor. I mean, otherwise you walk back into your life after rehab, and there are people that don't understand you, people that love you. They love you. They helped you get here to this place, but they don't know. They don't understand us. You have to be one of us, one of us alcoholic addict maniacs to really get it. Like if you tell a normie, oh, I was thinking this morning, I woke up and I'm thinking about doing this and this and this, they'll be horrified. Like, what are you fucking, but you tell one of us, and we're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I was thinking the same thing.
You know, having someone that gets it, I think, is huge. And I just have like a couple last questions for you, Tom.
Yeah.
What do you hope people learn from your story? You know, we've talked about a lot tonight, child trauma, you know, people stepping in, what Roseanne did for you to get you sober the first time. You talk about the support of a sponsor, giving back. But if there was something as you're looking back over this, want people to learn or to take away from your story, what would that be?
Well, you know, the people ask, because my sister became the biggest drug dealer in America, and people say, was that embarrassing that your sister was the biggest drug dealer in America? And I say, not when I was using drugs, it wasn't. It was actually kind of handy. And I remember she came over at Thanksgiving with her big leather purse full of her gun and drugs. And the other, by then there's 6 more of us. She just kind of motioned, and we'd all get up from the table and go out to the garage, which was freezing. It's Iowa. And be in a circle, all the brothers and sisters. And she would say, what do you want? And I'd say, what do you got? And she said, everything. And I'd say, that's what I want. And I remember that a lot, because everything is what I want. So people, you know, you want to be around people that support you, but you want to be around like-minded people. You want to be of service. The thing I sell this program on is, hey, you get some little bit of time under your belt, and you could be helping these people. Once somebody gets over that little hump and they're helping people, then they got skin in the game. And I think that's the best thing. And if you're worried about feeling better about yourself, that's the thing that will do it. So I've relapsed. I came back, you know, I had to be honest about what was going on. You know, there are people that are not like us that you don't necessarily have to be rigorously honest with. In your life, if there's someone that shames you, because we have a freaking disease, man. And if someone that shames you again, they want to keep you effed up. There are people that can't deal with you getting it together. There are relationships. They always say, wait a year to get in a relationship, which is very smart, because the guy you are on day one is way different than the guy on 1 year. And you know, we'll put ourselves out there for less, or, you know, and you also, if you have a relationship, it's good guy, bad guy until you get sober. And then all of a sudden the other person, you know, it's not necessarily their fault. They don't know what to do, because it's not good guy, bad guy. They lived for being the good guy and you being the bad guy. And you get into these relationships that become very toxic. So that's what I have to say. Just keep at it.
Keep at it. So what is next for you, Tom? I know you're not slowing down. I know those kids keep you busy, but what's next for you? What can we anticipate in the near future? I know you're going to be back out there, you know, acting and doing your thing. So what's next?
Well, I'm doing a reoccurring role on this show called, what is it called? Feds, The Rookie Feds, the DC Dash. There was an episode I did last night on. You know, I go around and I filmed the True Lies TV series that Jim Cameron's producing for CBS. Did a little something with them. I filmed Arnold Schwarzenegger's Netflix spy series. I go to these autograph things. I have a lot of, you know, again, I have 4 ex-wives, so I have a lot of alimony. Although people are like, are you afraid of getting older? What about when you turn 65? And I say, when I turn 65, it'll be the best day ever, because that's when I get to stop paying alimony. But I go around to these autograph shows, fan Comic-Con things, and I love that. And I do stand-up while I'm there. I'll do a show in that town, and it's great. You know, the biggest I have coming up is Father Daughter Dance. It's my first one. Next. And I'm so excited.
To experience.
Yeah, you talk about a gift, a reward for sobriety. Like, that's something I thought, boy, I wonder if I'll ever have that opportunity. I wonder if I'll ever have kids or whatever. And that's a big deal to me. So, you know, you have to take those things and appreciate them and not take anything for granted.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for just being so transparent and sharing your journey with us. Thank you, everyone who tuned in, whether you're watching this live or on the replay. Tom gave us so many golden nuggets, and he was so transparent with her story, and we really appreciate it. And that's going to do it for another episode of Addiction Talk.